This is a Sith Wayfinder from Galaxy's Edge. And the way it works is you activate it, and then you give it a Kyber crystal to scan. And it will tell you facts about a planet associated with the character that's associated with the Kyber crystal. However, it doesn't work with all Kyber crystals. Custom Kyber crystals, or Kyber crystals that have been modified with a handheld writer like this, do not work with the Wayfinder. And in this video, I want to look at why that is and how to fix those Kyber crystals so they will work with the Wayfinder. If you're unfamiliar with the Wayfinder, it comes in two colors, this dark color and a light color. They come packaged in a box so you don't know what color you're buying. The functionality between the two different colored Wayfinders is virtually identical, except for two things. The dark Wayfinder, when you activate it, has a green light coming from inside the top. On the light colored Wayfinder, it's a blue color. The dark Wayfinder, if you've activated it and you let it sit for a few minutes, will start making the noise of Darth Vader breathing. The light colored Wayfinder will make the noise of Emperor Palpatine laughing. But besides those two things, the dark and light colored Wayfinders have identical behavior. To get it to work with a Kyber crystal, once you've activated it, by attaching this cable like so, you want to wave your Kyber crystal towards the base of the Wayfinder beneath where this cable has attached, like so.
Tatooine is a harsh desert world of sand dunes and baking rock that orbits twin suns in the galaxy's outer rim.
And if I wave the crystal in front of it again, it'll give me another fact. And if I just leave the crystal sitting in front of it, it will go through all of the facts that it knows about, in this case, Tatooine. And then it'll loop back to the beginning and keep repeating those facts over and over again. But with custom Kyber crystals, or Kyber crystals that have been modified with a handheld RFID writer like this, it ignores it. To understand why the Wayfinder doesn't work with custom Kyber crystals or regular Kyber crystals modified by the writer, you need to understand some of the details about how the Wayfinder works and how these Kyber crystals work. Inside the Kyber crystal is an RFID tag, specifically an EM4305 RFID tag. And that RFID tag, in its default mode, just spits out a bunch of data when it's in the presence of an RFID reader, like the one that's in the Wayfinder. This thing starts emitting data, specifically the ID that's associated with the RFID tag, and the holocron and the Savvy's Workshop hilt reads that ID and reacts appropriately. This is how Savvy's Workshop hilts and holocrons work. The Wayfinder has been programmed, for whatever reason, to instead send out a read command that is specific to the EM4305 RFID tag that is in stock Kyber crystals. If you have a custom Kyber crystal that uses a different RFID tag, then it's not going to work with the Wayfinder. It'll still work with a holocron and a Savvy's Workshop hilt, it just won't work with the Wayfinder. If you have a Kyber crystal that you've modified with one of these handheld writers, or a custom Kyber crystal that uses an EM4305 tag in it, but was programmed, again, with one of these handheld writers, they won't work with Wayfinders because these handheld writers enable a configuration option inside that EM4305 RFID tag called the Read Login option. With this configuration option enabled, In order to read specific words or specific pieces of data from the RFID tag, you need to first send a login command. The Wayfinder isn't programmed to send a login command. It is just sending a read command. With that read login option enabled, the RFID tag in Kyber Crystals will ignore that. That is why the Wayfinder will ignore custom Kyber Crystals and stock Kyber Crystals that have been programmed with one of these handheld writers. To fix these crystals, you need to change the configuration of the RFID tag that's in them to disable this read login option. And once that option has been disabled, they will work with a Wayfinder once again. To reconfigure the RFID tag in these Kyber Crystals, you'll need something like this. This is a Proxmark3 Easy. I've covered this device in previous videos on this channel, and I'm not going to go into any depth about how to set one up or how to use it. I will include links to a few resources in the description below if you're interested in getting one yourself and need help setting it up. For this video, I'm just going to quickly reconfigure the RFID tag in this custom Kyber Crystal so it works with the Wayfinder. So I put the custom Kyber Crystal over the antenna of the Proxmark3, and I'm also going to add a coin placed about halfway underneath the antenna. The coin is a trick to help the Proxmark3 have better success at reading and writing to the RFID tag in the Kyber Crystal. The reason is the antenna, both in custom Kyber Crystals and stock Kyber Crystals, is pretty small, and it's being overpowered by the larger antenna of the Proxmark. Adding a little lump of metal to help soak up some of that signal strength will help aid in the Proxmark3 reading from and writing to the RFID tag in the Kyber Crystal. Now that I have reconfigured this Kyber Crystal, it will work with the Wayfinder. So that is how you can fix a custom or stock Kyber Crystal that's been programmed with one of these handheld RFID writers so that it will work with a Wayfinder. All you need to do is write a new value to the configuration word of the Kyber Crystal. The configuration word is stored at address 4, and the value you need to write is 0001805F. That is the configuration value for stock Kyber Crystals, and it keeps the read login and write login options disabled. The write login option isn't something I've talked about yet. Some of these RFID writers also enable a write login option, which, just like the read login option, means that before a write command will be accepted by the RFID tag, it needs to receive a login command. To make the Proxmark3 send a login command before it issues a write command, you need to provide a password to the write command. For stock Kyber Crystals, that password is going to be 8 zeros. However, some of these RFID writers will also set a new password. And in none of the documentation that you received with your writer will there be any mention of what password it uses. In the description below, I will include a list of 5 common passwords that are used by this style of RFID writer. One of them should work for you. That is all the information that I want to share in this video. For the rest of this video, I want to try and do a decoding of the communications between the Wayfinder and the Kyber Crystal and I want to use the Proxmark3 to capture those communications and decode them. My goal is to demonstrate exactly what the Wayfinder is doing, to show you the read commands that it is sending to the Kyber Crystal, to prove that everything that I've said in this video is correct. My guess is it's going to be a long, rambling mess of a thing. So if you've got all the information you want, it's perfectly okay to go ahead and stop the video now. But if you're interested in seeing a little Proxmark3 action and how the Wayfinder really operates, stick around and we will dig in. Before we begin, I want to mention the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge Discord server. It's free to join. I'll include a link in the description down below. We have a makerspace forum there where I have created a thread going over exactly what I'm about to show you, which is decoding all the commands that the Wayfinder is sending to the Kyber Crystals. I include links to Windows builds of the Proxmark software, as well as a file of a capture that I have made of that communication, so that you can do what I'm about to do on your own, even if you don't have a Proxmark3. So I'm going to begin by using the Proxmark3 to capture the communications between the Wayfinder and a Kyber crystal. Now this little cable here is not necessary and it just gets in the way, so I'm going to remove that. Instead, I'm just going to use a little magnet to trigger this thing to turn it on when I need to. I want to talk about how I'm capturing the data here. We have a couple of issues in capturing data with the Proxmark3. We've got a bigger antenna than what really should be there for this style of RFID tag. And the antenna that's in the Wayfinder is very big as well. It's going to put out a much more powerful signal than the signal that's coming out of the Kyber crystal. Now, through trial and error, because I've already done this, I have found that the best way to capture signals is to have the Proxmark3 and then the Kyber crystal and then the Wayfinder. And the Kyber crystal needs to be about a finger's width or a little bit more above the antenna of the Proxmark3. So it's going to be something like this. Another issue that we need to keep in mind when we're doing this is that, again, the signal coming out of the Wayfinder is very powerful. Just this close, the Proxmark3 is going to start picking up the signal coming from here. The Proxmark3 has a finite amount of memory, so once it starts capturing data, it finishes capturing data in like a half a second. So if it takes you a second to bring the Wayfinder up to the antenna, it's going to capture a bunch of garbage, a bunch of early stuff that you don't want. It won't include the response from the tag in the Kyber crystal. So you really need to just zoom this thing in as quickly as possible, at the same time keeping the right distance from the Kyber crystal and the Proxmark3. It is a nightmare. It took me many tries to figure out all of this positioning and finally getting a good capture, which is why I have, again, on the Galaxy's Edge Discord server, a copy of one of these captures that is usable. And it's much easier to use pre-captured data than trying to do a new capture. But for the sake of this video, I am going to do a new capture and you can follow along. On your screen now, I have my Proxmark3 setup. I have the console program that you see on the lower half, and I have a plot window. The plot window will contain a graph of all the samples that the Proxmark3 takes. To open up that window, you start with the command data plot, and that would open up the window for you. The next thing I want to do is I want to configure the Proxmark3 so that when it's capturing data, it's only going to start capturing data once it detects a signal. I'll show you real quick. If I just do an LF sniff right now, it's going to immediately start capturing data, and you can see it's just garbage. It's picking up noise, electrical noise from nearby LED lights and who knows what else. And the values that it's recording here aren't very strong. what we can do is tell the Proxmark3 to wait until a strong signal is present and then start recording. And to do that, we use the lfconfig command. And we can see right now the trigger threshold, which is what the signal level has to be above in order to start recording. It's currently set at 0, so it's just going to start recording everything when you do a sniff command. I'm going to change that. I'm going to set it to 60. 30 would work. 90 would probably work. There's no specific value here other than something significantly greater than 0. Now if I do an lfsniff command, it's going to sit and wait until it detects something. And I can come over here to my Wayfinder, turn it on, activate it. And now I'm going to start bringing it close to the Proxmark3 antenna. And you can see it's picked up new data. It doesn't look like much right now, but if we use the up and down arrows to zoom out, we can see there is something there. And those little squiggles that we're seeing, that's the RF field being generated by the Wayfinder. That field is what powers the RFID tag in the Kyber crystal, and then the Kyber crystal's RFID tag will actually alter that field to send commands or data back to the reader. Now, because I brought the Wayfinder in very slowly, the values here aren't very high. If I do this again, but bring in the Wayfinder much more quickly, you can see the signal is much stronger now. Or with the Wayfinder placed right up against the Proxmark3 when I run this command, you can see the signals are even stronger than before. Okay, so let's get to capturing data between the Kyber crystal and the Wayfinder. Of course, it helps if I actually start the sniff command. I'm looking at the data here, the capture. I can see it's captured the crystal responding to the Wayfinder, but I don't have the Wayfinder data here, the commands the Wayfinder sends out. I'm going to try holding this in a different manner. I'm going to hold the crystal in the middle of the antenna and bring the Wayfinder down from above. I find this usually works better. There we go. Okay, I have exactly what I was looking for. Why do I know I got a good capture there? Well, if we look at the graph, we have a short section followed by a longer section. And you can see in the longer section there are two very tall peaks there, or two very tall sections. Those two tall sections are the Wayfinder commands being sent to the Kyber crystal. So I know I've got the Wayfinder commands now in the signal. Okay, so I want to zoom in. I'm using the down arrow to zoom in here. That first section we're looking at right now, that is the Kyber crystal doing its work in its default read mode, where it's just spitting out its data. And then if we keep moving to the right, we see that second block. This is the same thing. In fact, if we zoom out, we can probably notice that they both start the same way. You can see there's a bunch of peaks followed by a little empty period and then more peaks. It's just the same data being spat out from the Kyber crystal. And we could take this signal and we could decode it into the tag ID that Kyber crystals have, that this Kyber crystal has. But before I do that, I want to do something very important. I want to save the capture that I've made here. So I'm going to do a data save. And I'm calling it query 2 because the file that I've shared on the Discord server is just called query. So I want to differentiate between the two, because I might want to share this after the video gets posted. Or maybe query 3, because apparently I already have a query 2. In any case, let's keep going here. All right, I now want to show you how to decode this data. I'm going to use my mouse here to left click on the left hand side, right click on the right hand side, and hit the T button here with my cursor in focus of the graph window here. And that just trims the data to only that section there. And now I can come down here to the console and do a do a data raw demod. This is going to demodulate the data. And I know that the format of the data is ASK Manchester. And it's detected some of the bits that are being passed, but not all of them. I have found that there is a command called norm for normalization that usually fixes this, that helps the Proxmark3 decode this data. So if you watch the graph, when I do the data norm, you can see that the peaks and the valleys sort of get longer. And now if I do that demod again, we've got a complete bit stream. That is all the data being sent out by the RFID tag in its default read mode. You might notice we've got an extra 4 ones at the end. That's this section at the beginning being repeated because, again, Kyber crystals, they're configured so that they just keep repeating that data over and over and over again. These 2 rows of bits, that is the data that we're interested in. And I can tell you that this data is encoded in the EM4100 protocol, and there is a website which explains how the EM4100 protocol works. You could take all of this data, the first 9 ones are a marker that tells whatever RFID reader there is that we've got data coming after the 9 ones, and then all of the data that comes after it is the data on the chip. And the way to decode this data is to break it down into rows of 5 bits. 4 data bits followed by 1 parity bit. The parity bit is used to help ensure that the data has been received correctly. For every row, count up how many ones appear in that row. If it's an odd number, the parity bit becomes 1. If it's an even number of ones, the parity bit becomes 0. The very last 5 bits of this data is parity bits for the columns. So if you organize all this data into a rectangle, you can then check the parity and then decode the data. Let me open up Notepad here and show you exactly what I mean. And I am going to copy all of this data here, bring it into Notepad. And we're going to break everything down, just like I said earlier, 4 bits and a parity bit like this. So now if we go row by row here, checking those row parity bits, we can see they all match up. The only rows we have ones are here and here, and we have an even number of ones, so the parity bits are all zeros here. Now let's look at the column parity. Well, this column only has 1 1, so we have a parity bit of set to 1. And then we have 2 ones in this column. Parity bit is 0. This column has 1 1, so the parity bit is set to 1. So looking at the parity bits, everything lines up. I think we can be confident that we have a good capture of the data. So now I'm just going to delete all of those parity bits. Now, another thing to keep in mind, the first 2 rows aren't actually data so much as like a version or ID number that the RFID tag can share. I've never seen any values sent out by Kyber crystals here except for zeros. Since this isn't part of the RFID tag that's been programmed to the Kyber crystal, I'm just going to delete that as well. And now just concatenate all of this data back into a big binary value like that. And now we just convert it into a decimal or hexadecimal value. To do this, I like to use the Windows Calculator program in programmer mode because it lets you paste in binary values, and then we'll show you both the decimal and hexadecimal values. Okay, so I've brought in the Windows Calculator here, and I'm just going to take that binary value, paste it into the binary section, and there we go. We've got a decimal value there of 3078, which is what a small cut blue crystal should have. So hopefully that starts to make some sense for you about decoding this data to confirm how the data from the Kyber crystal is being transmitted. to show you how you can use the Proxmark3 to decode that data. And we can use that later on to verify that we're interpreting the read commands coming from the Wayfinder correctly. Okay, so back to this graph we go. I lost all the other data I had when I trimmed the data to just this section here, so I need to load the data. Luckily I saved it, so I'll just reuse the capture that I saved. And there is all of our data. Now let's zoom in on the Wayfinder section. Now remember, I mentioned how the taller sections are the Wayfinder transmitting commands. Besides the difference in signal strength, there is another way to tell that this is coming from the Wayfinder. And that is looking at this gap here, or this trough, right before this section of data here. That is a field stop. That is where the Wayfinder's RFID reader stops emitting a signal briefly. This signals to any RFID tag that a command is about to come. This field stop needs to be followed by a 0, and we'll see in a minute here how that data is being transmitted. I have here the datasheet for the EM4305 RFID tag. What I'm interested in right now is looking at the section that talks about how to send commands to that tag. And here on page 9, we get into how data is sent to the RFID tag. That's in the Kyber crystal. And we see it talks about the field stop, which is the field turning off that I mentioned earlier. And then it talks about how to send a logic 1 and a logic 0. And we can see a graph here as well. So what we want to look at here is how 0s and 1s are being transmitted. We see that the field is turned on for about half of a bit period. Bit period refers to how long it takes to send a single bit. And for half of the period here, the RF field from the reader has to be on. And that's important because it needs to provide power to the RFID tag. The second half of that bit period, though, either the field is going to stay on to transmit a 1, or it's going to turn off completely to transmit a 0. And remember, we see that a field stop, which comes at the beginning of this graph here, also shows the field being off completely just for a longer period of time. Now let's go back into the graph and let's take a look more closely at these peaks and valleys that we've captured here. Here's our field stop, and then the field, remember, initially turns back on. This is to power the Kyber crystal. And then it drops all the way down to the bottom here. That's because the field has been turned off. A 0 is being transmitted. Then the field turns on, again, to power the RFID tag. And then it doesn't turn off all the way here. And that is our clue that a 1 is being transmitted. And then the field turns back on, and then it turns off again. But this time the valley goes all the way to the bottom. We've got a 0. It turns on, and then it turns off all the way. We've got another 0. Turns on, and then it doesn't turn off all the way. Again, a 1. So looking at these valleys here, if it goes all the way to the bottom, you've got a 0. And if it doesn't go all the way to the bottom, you have a 1. So let's bring back our notepad, and let's start keeping track of what we've got here. We have we're going to start at the very beginning here. I'll mark the beginning and the end of the command here. The first valley here goes all the way down, so we've got a 0. And then we see a valley that doesn't come all the way down. We've got a 1, followed by a 0, and then another 0, and then a 1, and then a 0, and then a 1, and then a 1, and a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0. So hopefully that will make some sense. Let me follow you through the graph again with my cursor. We've got a 0, and then a 1, because the valley doesn't come all the way down. 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. That is the data that we've just recorded from the Wayfinder. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to the PDF and take a look. Here on page 10, we have the command structure. We can see that commands are sent as 3 bits, followed by a parity bit. And down here there is a table that shows us the bit pattern for different commands. And we can see a read word command is a 100, followed by a 1 for a parity bit. Following the command, we should see the address structure. This is the address that the reader wants to read. And it's 4 bits, followed by 2 zeros, followed by a parity bit. So that's 4 bits for the command, 7 bits for the address. So we're looking for 11 bits of data here. But there is also a 12th bit that we need to be aware of. If we look down here, it says upon successful decoding of the first field stop, which is that field stop that I showed you in the graph earlier, a 0 has to be sent to tell the RFID tag that a command is coming. So if we look back at the data we recorded, we have a 0, that's the, hey, there's a command coming, get ready, followed by 100 and a parity bit of 1, which is the read word command, followed by the address, 2 zeros, and a parity bit. So what we have here is a read address 6 command. All of this is in binary. This value here, the address, is a binary encoding of the value 6. So if this is correct, if what we're seeing here is a read address 6, then the data that follows this little block should be the contents of address 6, along with a preamble that I want to point out. Here we have the read word command being described to us, and it says that when the command is correctly processed, we will see a preamble pattern of 4 zeros followed by 1010. So let's keep that in mind as we head back over here to our data, and let's try to decode the section that follows this command, just like we decoded the previous section. So I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to set my pointers here, my left and right mouse clicks, to trim the data to just this middle section here, which should contain the value stored in address 6. So I trim that data, and again we can do that data raw demod. And just like before, it doesn't seem to be able to pick up all of the bits. So if we do a normalization procedure and try that again, we've got our response. So let's grab all of that data and bring that back into Notepad. Now remember, the preamble talked about 4 zeros followed by 1010. Well, there it is. There's our preamble. So it looks like we've got good data. Or at least we can see we've got the preamble that we expected in response to a read word command, which means all of the stuff that comes after it is the value stored in address 6. I'm going to take a shortcut here, though, and I want to remove a little bit more of this data so we can focus in on what value we actually got. You might notice here we have a series of 9 ones, which we know is the start of that EM4100 data that we saw earlier. After the Kyber Crystals RFID tag responds to this read word command, it reverts back to this default read mode where it just spits out the data. That's what we're seeing here. We're seeing all of the data had been transmitted. The RFID tag has now reverted back to its default read mode and it's just started spitting out its data again. So we can delete that. That's not relevant to what we want to decode here. So there is our data, these 2 lines. And how do we decode that? If we go back into the PDF and scroll up here under the command section, we see a data structure section which explains how the data is transmitted. And this should look familiar because it's basically what we did with the EM4100 data, except instead of operating on 4 data bits and 1 parity bit, this uses 8 data bits followed by 1 parity bit. So we are looking for 5 rows of 9 bits. So let's decode that. 8 data bits followed by a parity bit. Well, that lined up. We've got a good rectangle of data here. And let's check the parity bits. 2 ones on this row gives us a 0. Good. And a single 1, an odd number of 1s, so the parity bit is set to 1. We have 3 1s in this row, an odd number, so the parity bit is set to 1. The same with the columns, an odd number. No 1s here, an odd number of 1s, so we get another 1. An odd number of 1s. An even number of 1s gets us a 0. No 1s in this column. And 1 in that column. So it looks like the parity bits work out fine. So we'll do what we did before. Now, we'll just get rid of the parity bits. Concatenate all of that. And there is the data stored in address 6. Except there's one more step. We need to reverse this string. The data was transmitted in such a way that the least significant bit is on the left-hand side, not the right-hand side. So if we paste this into the calculator to see what the value is, we're going to get the wrong value. We need to reverse it. So we can just do this by hand, or you could go online. There are websites out there that will do this operation for you, but we can do this. So I'm going to take these 2 zeros, just move them down, and just start, copying and pasting from the end of one to the end of another. There is our decoded value. Let's plop it into the calculator and see what happens. We have a hexadecimal value here of 29803000. Is that what we would expect? Well, this is my Galaxy's Edge research spreadsheet. I'll include a link to it down below. And in one of the worksheets here, I have a list of all the Kyber crystals and their values at address 6, because address 6 is what gives Kyber crystals their value. So if you wanted to use a Proxmark3 to change a Kyber crystal to a different type of Kyber crystal, all you would need to do is write a new value to address 6. And if we look, there's 3078, which we know is what the value we decoded earlier. And the address 6 value is 29803000. That's the exact same value that we got with the calculator decoding all of that data. So what does that mean? That means that we accurately decoded the command that the Wayfinder sent. It was, in fact, a read word 6 command, because we see the Kyber crystal responding with the value in word 6, along with the preamble for a read word instruction. So that is absolutely what is going on here. The Wayfinder is sending out a command to read word 6. Okay, one more section to look at. I'm going to load the data back up. So this should look familiar. This is the second command being sent by the Wayfinder. We see the field stop happening here. We see a 0 and then a 1001. We're familiar with that. 1001 is a read word command, which is then followed by the address, which in this case is 1001. And then we have those 2 zeros and the parity bit at the end. So the address it's looking at is 1001. That is address 9. So we have a read word 6 followed by a read word 9 command coming from the Wayfinder. And if we go back to that spreadsheet, which I'll bring up again, We can scroll down a little bit further and we see some data dumps that I've done of a bunch of different Kyber crystals. And if we go across the board, no Kyber crystal has ever had a value in address 9. It's always been all zeros. So when we look at the Kyber crystal's response to this read word 9 command, we should expect to see nothing but zeros, except for that preamble, remember. So let's go back and see if we even need to open up a calculator or a notepad to interpret this. I'll zoom out a little bit, scroll to the right, and here is our data. And we can sort of see how we might have that 0, 1, 0, or that 1, 0, 1, 0 here. You can see the pattern sort of breaks up here, followed by the same pattern over and over again, like it's a bunch of zeros. Well, that seems to be exactly what we would expect, but let's just double check. Let's do the trim again, like so. And then I'll just do a data norm, and then a raw demod. And there's the data. 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, as expected, followed by all zeros, followed by the beginning of the Kyber crystal going back into its default read mode. So that command is confirmed. It is a read word 9 command. So hopefully that made some sense. Hopefully you were able to follow along here. And again, if you want, you can do all of this on your own. You don't even need a Proxmark3. I have shared a similar capture on the Galaxy's Edge Discord server in the Makerspace forum there. That walks you through exactly what I just did here in the video. I'll also make this capture that I just made just for this video available via a link in the description down below, so that you can go ahead and take what I've done, take the raw data that I'm working from, and you can confirm or maybe figure out that I've done something wrong here. That yes, indeed, the Wayfinder is sending a read word 6 command followed by a read word 9 command. And that if a Kyber crystal has that read login option enabled, it won't respond with that preamble followed by the data. The Kyber crystal is just going to go back to its default read mode. The Wayfinder sees that it's not getting a valid response from the read word command. For whatever reason, decides to ignore the Kyber crystal or not respond to it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So if you've stuck through all the way to the end here, hopefully you agree with me now that what the Wayfinder is doing is it's sending 2 read commands that are specific to the RFID tag in Kyber crystals. And if it doesn't get a response to those commands, then it just ignores the Kyber crystal. And it doesn't need to. There's no reason for that to be happening. There's no data that it is reading from word 6 or word 9 that it can't get just by reading the default data that's being provided by the Kyber crystal when it's in its default read mode. That's how the holocrons do it, that's how the Savvy's Workshop hilt does it, and that's how this should have done it. However, a choice was made to not do it that way. And the only reason that I can think of for a Wayfinder to be programmed to behave in this manner is as a lame attempt to try and block custom or modified Kyber crystals from working with Wayfinders. And I think that's just silly because we can fix these Kyber crystals so that they will work with a Wayfinder. So that's only served to annoy people. And really what's going to happen is the custom Kyber crystal makers, they're going to quickly figure out how to use the Proxmark3, how to dissect everything and reprogram everything without one of those handheld writers. They're going to become smarter about how RFID tags work and how to analyze what these sorts of devices are doing in the future when the next Kyber crystal friendly product comes out. So really all this is doing is making the community stronger, more knowledgeable, and really ultimately just annoying us temporarily until everybody gets situated with a solution to fix their kyber crystals. And what I find really curious about this whole thing is the commands that this thing is using. Word 6 in a kyber crystal is combined with the data in Word 5 to form that default read mode data that we see. Word 5 just has 9 ones in it, followed by a bunch of zeros. That might sound familiar. When we were decoding all of this stuff earlier, you saw the 9 ones, which specified the start of the data. So that's why address 5 is the same for every kyber crystal. It's 9 ones followed by a bunch of zeros. Address 6 contains the actual value with all the parity bits and whatnot for the ID that the kyber crystal gets recognized as. So I kind of get why reading word 6 might be something you would do. You can read word 6 and confirm what the kyber crystal is. It's more work than you would normally need to go through, but I get that. Sure, read word 6. I understand it. What I don't get is read word 9. No kyber crystal has anything in that word. And I've tried programming kyber crystals with, all ones in that address, or ones and zeros and all sorts of random values to see if the Wayfinder maybe does something different. Maybe newer kyber crystals are going to come out with a value in address 9. But I don't see the Wayfinder doing anything different if it has a value in address 9. Which makes me think this is nothing more than a joke. A 69 joke. It's reading address 6 and it's reading address 9. And the only reason it's reading address 6 or any address is just to confirm that it's a kyber crystal that hasn't been modified. And the address 9 is there to make the joke. And that's it. So it feels pretty lame to me, but it is what it is. We understand it now, what's going on here, and how to circumvent what this thing is trying to stop us from doing. And in the long run, we're probably going to be all better for having to take the time to gain this extra little bit of knowledge. So at the end of the day, the joke is on them, not us. Still, it's a pretty cool device. I kind of like it.